All right. Can everyone hear me okay? And can everyone see the screen okay?
Yep.
Everyone can see? All right. So I might get started. So goal of tonight is to go through how to train for 70.3. In particular, Western Sydney 70.3 is what we're going to go through. So I'm going to talk in general about, how to train effectively, particularly for long distance stuff. I will talk about some specifics for Western Sydney. I will do another presentation about 2-3 weeks out from Western Sydney talking on race specifics of that day. So there's some stuff at the end of today that I'll just gloss over, just some generalizations for racing. But I will do another presentation a couple of weeks out when everyone are actually looking at the course and going through the specifics of, Western Sydney itself when we go through. So first up, to train. Okay, so before you even start thinking about training for stuff, the first thing I always tell everyone is in terms of your goals and everything else that you set for race day, everything needs to be process driven in terms of what you're doing. So I don't encourage people, especially first timers, to go out there and say, look, I want to finish in 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, whatever. I think that's the wrong way to go about events like this. The best way to go about events like this is to focus on doing the best process in training. So that means the best process for improving and getting your speed up and your endurance up and your ability up. And then on race day, you do the same thing. The time that you get on race day is just the outcome of doing the best job that you've done. So if you go out there and set yourself up for sort of a pass-fail by saying, hey, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do 6 hours, I think that's the wrong way to go about it. The best way is to go out there saying, I'm going to dedicate myself to this as best I can, and do the race process as best I can. And then the time that I get is what I deserve. And then you can go back afterwards and work out how to sort of get quicker in terms of what you're doing. So a couple of the myths about the event. So number one is, I'm going to say, is it's not going to get easy, right? When you go out and do these sorts of events, what I mean by that is you can't go out and train to the point that these are easy, right? This is not a 5K park run that you can jog through. The winner takes 4 hours, okay? And that guy is pretty quick. The majority of people are going to take between 5 and 8 hours to finish, right? So it is going to be a tough day. There's no point in the training that you go, oh, this is easy anymore for any of the 3 legs. So just get that as something that you sort of accept as part of what you're doing. So all 3 parts that you do at no point become something that you can cruise through. So what I mean by that is, you might be a swim background, you find the swim okay. You might be a run background, you find the run okay. But none of them are going to be necessarily easy, and nor do you have to be able to do all of them in training. So if you're preparing for, say, a sprint race or something like that, you can go out every single weekend and you can ride 20Ks and you can run 5Ks off the bike and get to the point where you're used to doing it. For the half Ironman stuff, you certainly don't get to that point when you're doing it. The next one is training more is not necessarily better. All right. So when you're training, it's not about how much training you're able to do. It's about how much training your body's able to absorb to do it well. So, there's some people that will go out there and they'll think, to do this well, every single run's got to be 15 Ks and every single bike ride's got to be 4 hours. No. Training more. Someone's got a kid. Is that you, Matt? Never mind. The training is never the training load is relative to what you're kind of doing. And on that note, I'd say as well is when you're training, you train at the level that's appropriate for you. So I tell this to all the guys that, do Ironman and things like that, is that you'll get there or close to race day and you'll see these massive training volumes that people are doing. So you'll see people that are racking up, 600 Ks a week on the bike and they're running 50, 60 Ks a week. That's all lovely, but that doesn't mean that's what's needed to do in order to hang on, Matt. I'm just going to, he's muted himself. All right. So that's number one. All right. Next thing is, I think everyone who wants to do these events wants some sort of guideline of where they should be up to before they train. And I think that is wise. So for some of you, you will have, maybe you're a run background, bike background, swim background, and one of these might be easy for you to kind of achieve. But I think for most people, if you're about to start sort of a 16-week training block to lead into these sort of events, you do want to be able to have a base level of fitness before you start. So I would say to most people doing these sorts of events, these are the 3 sort of benchmarks that I kind of think people should be up to in order to start training. Okay, so I think people should be able to swim about 1K. I think you should be able to bike for about an hour and a half. And I think you should be able to run sort of 7 to 10 Ks. Okay, the reason I give these benchmarks is not because I think this is where you need to be up to in order to compete the event well. Okay, let me just add one more person. Welcome, Amanda. It's more from an injury perspective. So if you can't sort of cover these sort of distances comfortably, I think ramping it up to a higher level is a recipe for potentially getting injured along the way. Okay, so you might say, hey, I can finish the bike and the run properly, but I'm not, that great of a swimmer. And I would say, look, that's okay if you're only sort of ramping one up. But if you're sort of struggling with all three, I'd say it's probably, an event that you've got to do a bit more background training for before you start that training process in terms of what you're doing. All right. So one of the big things that I want to do today, and one of the most important things that you need to learn for training in general, and particularly training for endurance events. So it doesn't matter whether it's a half Ironman, if it's an Ironman, if it's an ultra trail, if it's a marathon, is understanding your training zone. So whenever you're training, and I'm going to simplify a couple of things just so it's easy to kind of understand. But basically for everyone, you've got two main sources of energy that are going to fuel you to do anything. Okay, and those two primary sources are either sugar or carbohydrate, or it's fat, which is a form of bodily fat in terms of what you're doing. So if you're training or racing and you're going quite hard, you will be burning mostly sugar. So in a well-trained athlete, you're going to find, depending on the person, that you might have upwards of 90 minutes of sugar available to train, okay, and race in. After that point, you're going to run out of sugar, and that means you're going to run out of energy to be able to perform in terms of what you're doing. If you want to do events that last long distances, you need to be able to burn bodily fat as a primary fuel source in terms of what you're doing, okay? So if the winner of a half Ironman is taking 4 hours, I can guarantee you that he is burning a fair bit of bodily fat as well as sugar to get through those events. So if you're doing an event that is quite long distances, one of the main things that you've got to do is to teach your body that fat is the primary fuel source to get through. Okay, and that's largely done through working out training zones are and by keeping heart rates lower when they go through. So a couple of terms I'm going to use when I talk today. So aerobic training means that you're primarily using bodily fat as a fuel source. So when you're training or racing aerobically, you will breathe in oxygen, your body will combine that with fat, and you will breathe out carbon dioxide in terms of the outcome. Every single person, doesn't matter how skinny you are, has loads and loads of body fat to last effectively forever, okay, in terms of a fuel source. If you are training anaerobically, you have a high heart rate, your body burns sugar, either from your muscles or from your bloodstream, okay, and the byproduct of doing that is that you create lactic acid, all right? Lactic acid is the burning sensation that you get in your legs or your arms when you're doing stuff. If you're using sugar as your primary fuel source, one, it's difficult, okay, because it burns. That's the lactic acid buildup that you've got. But you have a very limited time frame that you'll be able to go for before you run out of energy. So if you think of doing a big event, the best analogy I can give to people is think of it as starting the event with a bathtub that's full, right? That's you loaded up with your bodily fat and you've got your sugar, all right? As you pull the plug out of the bath out, the bathtub empties. That's the sugar emptying out, okay? You turn the tap on at the top, that's you eating the food. Your job now is to get to the end of the event before the bathtub runs empty, okay? So as you're going through, the bathtub is emptying, the sugar is emptying out. You can eat, you can have gels, you can have carbohydrates, you can have all sorts of fuel intakes to top up the bath as you go through. But you need to make sure that the pace at which you're emptying out the bath is slow enough that you don't run out by the time that you get to the end, okay? Hang on, I'm just going to admit one more person. Welcome, Eileen. So a huge thing that I want people to understand is if you want to be successful at long distance events, you need to be really, really good at training easy, okay? And what I mean by easy is you need to train at a level that your body starts to learn to use fat as its primary fuel source in terms of what it's doing. One of the biggest mistakes that I always see is people want to get fast. And they think to get fast, I have to train hard, which kind of makes sense in a way. But the thing is, when you train hard, your body uses anaerobic energy systems. And when it does that, it does get really good at clearing lactic acid out of your system. Okay, what it doesn't get good at is being able to burn bodily fat as a fuel so that you can develop endurance in terms of what you're doing. Okay, so a key term that I use for all my athletes that I coach is I say hard is hard and easy is easy. Okay, so when you train hard, you are training your anaerobic training zones. Okay, and it should be hard. and that might be a track running session. It might be a really hard 1 hour indoor bike or something like that. But when you train easy, you should be able to jog along, cycle along, and you should be able to happily chat to the person next to you, okay? Where people make the mistake is they sort of merge that and they train too much in the gray, all right? And what happens is you're not really burning bodily fat. You're not really up the top end testing your capacity of your muscles. You're in this gray zone that sits in between, okay? The best benefit you're going to get is when you train and you learn that when I do my easy sessions, it needs to be easy. And when I do my hard sessions, within reason, it needs to be hard in terms of what you're doing. If you get that balance right, you'll reach a sweet spot in the middle where you're able to perform quite well, okay? Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about what I just said? Because that's one of the key messages that I kind of want to get across today. No? Okay. So I'm going to simplify a few things. So when it comes to setting up training zones, there's various different ways to kind of do it, okay? But they all have the same outcome. There's different reasoning why you might do it different ways, but they're all effectively saying, look, down in your lower zones, so your zone 1, zone 2, you're burning bodily fat. And when you're up in your higher zones, you are burning primarily sugar. And the answer is it's a blend between what's happening between any of those, okay? But the key concept I want people to understand is as your heart rate goes up, okay, you'll find the rate at which you burn sugar goes up, okay? The reason this happens is if you need to produce energy to contract muscles quicker, you'll find that your body is able to access sugar faster, okay? It's a quicker way to do it, and it's a great way for your body to be able to do what it needs quickly, all right? So if you're running away from a bear, the quickest way to do that is to take bodily sugar and give you energy as quickly as possible. As your heart rate comes down, you'll find your body opts and chooses to burn fat as a fuel source instead, okay? So if you're going for a really long walk, heart rate stays down, your body will burn fuel, okay? You have a great evolutionary design that sort of stores and saves the sugar for when it's needed, okay? Usually when you're chasing something or when you're running away from something so you don't get eaten. When you're just cruising along and going for a walk, your body will burn through fat because you have heaps and heaps of it strapped to you in terms of what you're doing. So in terms of training zones, and I'll get to how we use this shortly in terms of training, generally most of the time, regardless of how it's worked out, you'll have zone 1 all the way through to zone 5, okay? Zone 1 means that you are burning mostly fat as a fuel source. So if you went out walking the dog, you should be sitting there mostly in zone 1. If you decide to go run park run as hard as you can, you are going to be up here in zone 4, zone 5, okay? So what happens is when you're racing something like a half Ironman, okay, realistically, we want to be sitting around about here, okay? If we're down here, it's very slow, okay? You're not going to do well in those particular events from a performance perspective. But if you're up here, you might get about 50 Ks through the bike and then you're going to fall apart and you won't be able to keep running. In order to get the best performance, you're going to have to sit in here where we're burning a blend of both fat as well as sugar in terms of what we do, okay? Now, when it comes to training, your body will respond to the stimulus that you give it. So if you go out into the sun, your body responds by producing melanin and you put on a tan, okay? Your body will respond to the stimulus that you give it. So if you are doing all your training up here, okay, your body will get much better at taking blood from the bloodstream, okay, creating lactic acid as a byproduct and learning how to clear it out, okay? So if you're up here all the time, that's what you will do. If you spend a lot of time down in these training zones down here, your body will get really good at metabolizing fat from the cells, burning that as a fuel source, and then that's how you're going to produce your energy. So a lot of the training that you guys need to do, almost as an 80-20 rule, is 80% of the time you should be aiming to be down here, okay? And 20% of the time in terms of your training, you should be up here. So what does that look like on a practical basis? So I grabbed a couple of charts of athletes that I coach, all right? And this is what this zones look like. All right, so zone 1 here, zone 2 down here. Okay, on a practical basis, this is the graph of someone doing a nice, easy, long run down in zone 2. Okay, so you can see here for this athlete, they start walking, they come up to here, and then they more or less just sit sideways down here. Okay, so this is someone being able to run, in this case, I think it's about a 90-minute run, okay, just happily along in a zone 2. So this is the sort of training that you would need to get good at endurance running and endurance cycling, okay? If this athlete came up here, one, It's going to be incredibly hard, okay, to hold these higher heart rates, but you're also burning through a tremendous amount of sugar at this point here. So you're going to find you literally run out of energy to be able to continue to do this. In comparison, I'm going to show another graph, which is someone doing the opposite. So instead of going out and doing an easy aerobic run, they're doing a 10K race as hard as they can. Okay, and you'll see in this case, heart rate comes up. Okay, this dotted line here, which I'm running the green bit over, is their lactate threshold. So this is the point at which they both create lactic acid and they can remove lactic acid out of their system. So you can see up here, they come up, the heart rate more or less sits up here for the entire time. Right, this is someone running 10Ks hard. And this is what I would 100% recommend you don't do when you're preparing for an event like an endurance event. It's fine if you're doing a testing event or maybe it's part of your 20% hard training, but this here is something that is not achievable to be able to do for long distances in terms of what you're doing. So in order to be good at long distances, you need to spend the bulk of your training time down in these lower bands so that you're teaching your body what the appropriate fuel source is to be able to get good at doing long distance events. All right, so I'll say this a few times, but the biggest mistake I see people make is they do things like they say, oh, I want to run, 5-minute K pace for the half marathon. And that's all lovely, okay? But if 5-minute K pace means that your heart rate is up here, it's not an achievable goal, all right? Whereas if you learn, hey, I'm going to go do my training down here, and maybe that's 6 minutes 30 per K. Maybe it's 8 minutes per K down through here. Ironically, your body gets much better at producing energy, and you'll actually find that your cruising speed will start getting faster. Okay, despite the fact of you running slowly or training easy, you'll find you start getting faster as a result of being able to generate more power. The best analogy I can probably give people is cylinders in a car, right? If you have a 4-cylinder car, it doesn't have the same capacity to go quickly as an 8-cylinder car. All right, if you go train down in the lower heart rate bands, hopefully you're going to turn your 4-cylinder car into an 8-cylinder car. Okay, and then when you do put your foot down, you'll actually find you're able to generate more energy and do it more efficiently, and you'll therefore be able to start running faster for the same sort of heart rates that you were doing previously. All right, so the big summary about training zones and energy systems is, number one, your body will adapt to the stimulus that you give it. All right, so if you want to be good at long distance events, you need to spend a high amount of your time doing aerobic training, which means working out how to keep your heart rate down when you do it. All right. If you train at lower heart rates, your body will adapt and learn to use bodily fat as a fuel source for you. Okay. So the same analogy is if you stand out in the sun, your body will produce melanin, which will give you a tan. Okay, if you train at lower heart rates, your body goes, you know what, we should get better at metabolizing the fat that we've got in our fuel cells, our fat cells, and we should burn that for energy because this person's giving me the chance to learn how to do that, right? If you have a good aerobic capacity, you will be able to burn more fuel per minute because you're able to move the fat from the cells into a way that can be burnt by your body. And that will enable you to be able to start running faster. The same as turning a 4-cylinder into an 8-cylinder car. Okay, if you can metabolize more fat, you can create more energy, you will be able to start running faster. Even though it doesn't sound intuitive, running slowly or cycling slowly will enable you to be able to go harder when it's time to go through. Learn that easy is easy and hard is hard, right? So when you're going out easy, don't let your ego say, I want to run 5-minute K pace because I want that to be easy. If you go out running at those paces, right, instead of following the process of what you need to do to make those easy, you'll find that you sit with a heart rate that's too high and you're sitting in that gray zone where it's not really easy, it's not really hard, it's somewhere in between. So you're not achieving the outcome that you want when you do it. All right, and lastly, use the analogy of the bathtub. If you want to get good at long distance events, it's all about making sure that you have fuel to last for the entire thing. So you cannot eat your way through a 70.3. You cannot eat the amount of calories you need to match your burn rate in terms of what you're doing. You do not have enough blood sugar or muscle glycogen or muscle sugar to be able to get through those events either. So what you need to learn to do is to get better at burning bodily fat when you do it. And that's done by keeping heart rates down when you're training. Okay, so before I move on, does anyone have any questions at all about the training zones at all before I move? No? Okay. So what does a training plan look like? All right. So normally when you're training for a big event, you break it up into blocks of training. Okay. So, a real base way of training would be just running a little bit further each week. Okay. Riding a little bit further. You can definitely do it that way if your goal is to completion. But the better way to do it is to structure your training. So I think it's 15 weeks out, I think this week, or 16 weeks out from Western Sydney at the moment. So normally the way you would structure training for an event is to layer on what needs to be done. All right. So in the first phase, I'll break this down into 4 phases. We focus on aerobic training, which is the easy training that I just spoke about, and you would focus on strength training. Okay. So your goal here is to improve your overall strength in terms of what you're doing, and to improve your ability to burn bodily fat as a fuel. All right. And your next phase of training, so about 12 weeks out, we want to continue our aerobic training because that's not going to change at all through this entire process. And we want to improve our endurance strength training. And I will go through examples of what all this means soon enough. And by endurance strength, instead of going to the gym and doing, say, lunges and squats and stuff like that, we're now doing things like going out on a bike, and we're maybe going and doing hill reps up with low cadence up hills. Okay. And we're trying to build in the ability to maintain a good level of endurance strength. So being able to grind away for decent blocks of time when we're doing it. Phase 3 is where we normally start layering in aerobic training with some quality efforts. Okay. And so this might be the point where things like doing some hard runs come in. So we talked about the 80-20 rule. So we're still sticking to our 80% of our training being aerobic, but now 20% of our efforts might be doing hard run efforts or hard bike efforts or hard swimming efforts in terms of what we're doing. When we get into the very last phase, which is 4 weeks sort of out, what we're doing now is really your race prep. So all the training in the lead up has been a lot of the time focusing on, aerobic training, okay, and little bits of, this 20% being made up into strength training or endurance strength or track running efforts. Now we're starting to almost get into a phase where we're entering a gray zone, where your racing paces are going to be somewhere between, hang on, let's add someone else in. Welcome, Hamza. We're getting to a point where we're actually trying to hold paces that are not aerobic, they're not anaerobic, they're sitting somewhere in between. And we're trying to find that zone sort of 3 to zone 4 stuff, okay, that's going to get us the best race performances in terms of what we're doing. But if we've done well with developing our aerobic capacity and we've done well with doing our 20% effort stuff, we should find that we're able to hit a sweet spot in between where we go, look, the event's going to take me 5, 6, 7 hours, and we can pace ourselves accordingly for what we're doing. So 16 weeks out, which is where everyone is at the moment. So the first and most important thing that you need to do is building your aerobic capacity. So building your ability to do easy sessions. So what that would look like for a lot of you is, whether you're up to 30 minutes of running or an hour of running at the moment, is going out there and doing it super easy in terms of what you're doing. So the things that I would encourage people to do would be things like, if your heart rate's getting too high for your training zones, is you walk to keep it down. So keeping in mind, the point of your training session is to keep yourself within your biochemistry limits, okay? It's not about testing your muscles in these sessions. Those are the quality things that we do. When we're talking about doing our training zone efforts of keeping aerobic capacity, it's purely about training your biochemistry to function how you want it to do, okay? And this is the point where, you have to tell people to drop their ego sometimes. Your ego says, I need to run this speed. And the answer is no. If you understand the point of the training session is to keep your heart rate within zone, then you don't have an ego. You just go, well, I've got to keep my heart rate at 140 beats or whatever it is. That's my goal for here, okay? The next thing that I encourage people to do in this point is to start injury-proofing their body, all right? So you will get to a point where the training load gets higher. You're going to start running a lot, biking a lot, swimming a lot, okay? So for me, gym work is not, getting into a squat rack and lifting heavy weights. For me, it's doing a lot of functional training. So making sure that we're keeping all the stability points of our body stable so that when we do add in the training load later, it holds together, okay? So for me, this is doing stuff like making sure our glute strength is up there. So our glute stabilizing strength, our calf strength, our ankle strength, and our shoulder strength, and our just general core strength is up there. Because if you can keep everything stable, you'll find that when you lift up to the heavier training loads, it just needs to hold stable for that period. And that period might only be 6 to 8 weeks. Okay. And you need to have a stable body in through there. You might find your strength goes a little bit backwards in that patch, but as long as you've built it up nice and high and through this patch, by the time you get there, all you need to do is for it to stay strong enough to get through race day. take a breather, and then you go back to the next training cycle in terms of what you're doing. The other thing that I find is really good in this stage is also to work on technique. All right. So if you're out there and you're going, hey, the point of my run session is to keep my heart rate down, or the purpose of my swim session to keep my heart rate down, it's a great time to focus on your technique while you do it. Okay. So you can go into the water and you can do your technique work. You can go out and do your easy jogs and go, oh, I'm going to really focus on leaning forward and pulling back with my hamstring and my glute. You know, because you're jogging easy, you should have plenty of time there to focus on those things as you go through. All right, next 12 weeks out. All right, so you're going to see this again, aerobic training and building your aerobic capacity in easy sessions. This doesn't change, okay? What you're going to find is you're probably just starting to do more, okay? So your 45-minute run has now become 60, 70 minutes, and 60, 70 minutes has become 70, 80 minutes in terms of what you're doing. The next thing I would encourage you to do is you start building some strength endurance, okay? So strength endurance for me is having the ability to do strength efforts for longer periods of time. So instead of going to the gym and doing, 45 seconds of lunges or whatever, you're now going out to, a big hill like Bob and Head or something, and you're going up and down the hill. Okay, so you've got 10, 15-minute efforts, potentially at a lower cadence, to build up some leg strength in terms of what you do. So for me, the key to being good at 70.3 or Ironman is strength endurance, particularly on the bike. All right. So you could be Steve Moneghetti, but if you get off the bike tired, you can't run. All right. So you have to be really good at being strong on the bike. The other one is the swim. All right. The swim is, 1.9 Ks. So it is not a quick event. So if you can be quite strong and you can stay aerobic, the thing is you can go a good speed with a low heart rate in terms of what you're doing. So things like hill repeats and grinding away are good. And also in the water, introducing the pull buoy into the water to make sure you can improve your catch pull. And if your shoulders are okay with it, introducing paddles as well. All right. So particularly, half Ironman, pretty much every half Ironman in Australia will get a wetsuit on race day. So the better you are at catch pull, the better you will perform. All right. So every single person basically gets a full body wetsuit. So your kick is made a little bit null and void. But having a good catch pull, which you can develop in the water, will make a very big difference in terms of what you're doing. Your gym work will become maintenance, okay? So your job is not to get stronger. Your job is just to not go backwards. That's your only goal. So you just chip on through with the goal of making yourself injury-proof or as injury-proof as you can. All right, 8 weeks out, you'll see the same thing. You're still building your aerobic capacity. You're still doing easy sessions. It didn't suddenly all become hard. Everything still stays easy. But what you're starting to do here is if you really want to get that, performance side of what you're doing, so you go, hey, I want to not just finish the event, I want to go as fast as I can. That's when we start bringing in more of the 20% effort, start becoming potentially some speed work. So that might look like, going to your local athletics track and doing one session a week of harder efforts in terms of what you're doing. It might mean getting on the bike and instead of doing your hill repeats, you're doing little 30-second efforts on the bike to try to build some explosive power. Those are the little quality efforts that you're building in here. At the end of the day, your goal is to get stronger. And if you are stronger, your endurance strength will also go up in terms of what you're doing. The other thing, as you're building your volume by your easy session, you really want to start testing your race day nutrition. All right. And I will touch on this a little bit more later, but now is the time to start working out what foods work for you, what kind of eating schedules work for you, and making sure you're starting to trial the things that you're going to use on the race day. So I'm sure you've all been told don't test new stuff on race day, but starting sort of 8 weeks out is a good time to sort of see what nutritional products work for you. All right, and again, maintenance gym work, not to go forward, but purely just to try to stay injury-free, okay, by keeping your core strength and your stability strength up in terms of what you're doing. All right, 4 weeks out, you're starting to get right into the specific race prep. So this is where you're at a point where, again, maintaining your aerobic capacity, all right, the easy sessions still say easy, but now you've got some sessions which look very much like what you're going to do on race day. So that might be, hey, you're going to find a course that's similar to Western Sydney, which is flat with potholes, and you're going to practice that course. But now you're going to go out there and go, well, look, my race day power number or effort or heart rate is this. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do 25-minute efforts at my race, either power or race heart rate or whatever. And then I'm going to run 30, 45 minutes off the bike at the pace that I think I can hold. Okay. And you start practicing those things. you obviously practice your race day nutrition as well. Okay. But then's a good time to practice, what you think you can hold on the bike, what you think you can hold on the run. Okay. And see whether it's realistic as well. All right. So it's a good thing to sort of go out there and go, oh, look, maybe I can hold 30 minutes per K on the run. But if I tried to hold the day I thought I could hold 5-minute K pace, I blew up. So that's not a good idea. All right. But there's a time to test all those things as well. The other things to do in that 4-week out is to test out your race day equipment as well. So, if you're going to ride your TT bike, definitely pull that out and start using it and get used to it. If you're going to run in your carbon bladed shoes, then your runs off the bike should be in those carbon bladed shoes. If you're going to test, using your tri-suit or something, go out and use your tri-suit, and just get used to everything that you're going to use. But you don't want to go out and use equipment that's completely different to what you're going to do on race day, because you don't want anything new by the time you get to there when you're going forward. All right. So a big question I always get asked is, what's the biggest week look like in terms of your training? So I'm going to run through what the biggest week should look like for most people. So for most people doing it the first time, realistically, you're probably only going to be training once a day. You don't really need to be doing any more than that. And during the week, when I assume most of you have jobs that suck up a lot of your time, most of the time you probably only need to be doing about an hour a day to go through stuff. And most of your training is going to be out on the weekend in terms of what you're doing. So when you're getting towards the, couple of weeks out, so 3-4 weeks out, you're getting into the heaviest parts of your training and preparation. Something that I would give athletes to get used to it would be, look, on the Friday, maybe it's in the morning, maybe it's after work, they're going to go out there and they're going to specifically do a 1.9K swim at the pace that they think they're going to hold. Okay, so they can see, is that realistic, and get used to it. The next day, I would get them to get up and they're going to effectively ride their ride distance, okay, and do a 30-minute run. So I've said here, asterisk 90 Ks. All right, so this is course dependent. So typically, I would know roughly how long it's going to take an athlete to finish the course. So some guys will take 2 hours and 20 minutes. Some people are going to take 4 hours. Some people are going to take longer than that. So I would say, look, you're going to go out and you're going to ride the time that I think it's going to take you, so you can practice that. And then you're going to do a 30-minute run off the bike. You're going to go home. You're going to do your recovery stuff. You're going to eat. You're going to refuel. You're going to hydrate. You're going to stretch. You're going to have a nap. And the next day, we're going to get up and we're going to finish off that run. Okay. So we're going to go out the next day and we're going to run another 15 Ks or so. Okay. So you're effectively doing your half Ironman across about a 48-hour period. Okay, so something like that is what I think people should get to. So you can see here, none of these days, like this day here is pretty big, okay, but there's no 7-hour days here of training. There's no 5-hour days here of training. You need to break it up into a way that can be achievable. If you decide to go out there and go, I'm going to swim 1.9, then I'm going to run 90, and then I'm going to run 15, okay, the thing is, yes, a lot of you can do that, but the fatigue that you get from that is really quite high, and the recovery time that you need from that is really quite high. And so what it does is it prevents you from being able to train effectively for the next couple of days. Okay, so you've got to work out the balance between what you can do and what you can recover from. Okay, but something like this is what I would encourage most people, regardless of beginner or advanced, to be doing, okay, to finish off. If you're a really advanced person, you might do your 2.5-hour bike ride and you might do a full 12, 14K run off the bike or something like that, because there's plenty of people out there that can do that in an hour, okay? But for the bulk of people doing it, particularly first-timers, this is probably more than enough of a training session to recover from. And the next day, you're going to get up there on tired legs and you're going to go again. And you're going to see what it feels like to run on very tired legs in terms of what you're doing. Okay. So that's probably, I guess an overview of the training side. So building your training into blocks, okay? One, always building up aerobic capacity in terms of what you're doing. The opening sort of period is all about injury prevention as well. And then the latter stages of what you're doing are specific rate prep. But if you've done the first parts well, hopefully the body stays together and stays injury-free towards the end of what you're doing. So how to prevent injuries. All right. So this is a common one. The first thing that I'd say is don't overdo it. Right. So you can only train as much as your body can hold. So what I can do, what you can do, what I can do in 20 years from now and what I could do at 20 are all completely different. All right. So my training volume has to be suitable for where I'm up to in terms of what I'm doing. So what I mean by that is you need to make sure that the training volume suits, your current ability. So if I'm, maybe a cyclist and I'm used to riding 300 Ks a week every week, then suddenly riding 200 Ks a week is easy, all right? So it's not hard to do. But maybe my running is not up to scratch, okay? But for someone who's not a cyclist, riding 200 Ks a week is massive, right? And they're not going to be able to kind of do that. So you need to be able to find a training load that is suitable for where you're up to in terms of what you're doing, right? I'm always big on strength training, okay? I think strength training can be used in lieu of doing more training, all right? So, I'm a big advocate of, instead of going out there and doing another 3 swim sessions a week, that I would prefer someone went to the gym and worked on the muscles that they use for swimming, okay? Or they went out and did strength training for their hamstrings and glutes so that when they run better, rather than going out there and doing another track training session. So the load on your body is different when you do these things as well. So if you're always out there training aerobically, it does take a toll on your body when you're out there pounding the pavement constantly. You might be able to get a bigger benefit from a performance perspective by going to the gym for 30 minutes instead of flogging yourself, and you won't be as tired, okay? So for me, strength training is a huge one from a balance perspective, but also from a prevention of injuries as well. All right, progressing your training load gradually. All right, so you saw in all the what I had earlier, I said we want easy aerobic training a lot of the time, and we want to build that up slowly. So we don't just suddenly start with a 15K run every single week. All right, if you're trying to keep the training load really high, you're going to find that you probably can't sustain it. You just need to build it up slowly to a point that's manageable in terms of what you're doing. So general rule of thumb is 10%. So if I ran 5Ks this week, I'm going to run 5.5 Ks next week. And the week after that, I'm going to run 6 Ks. So I'm lifting up sort of 10% each week in terms of what you're doing. Adjusting your training to what your body's telling you to do. So making sure you're flexible with your approach to training. So let's say I rode the bike this morning and I was meant to run tonight, but I was absolutely exhausted from work. My legs are tired, my knees hurting from something I did. Being flexible enough with your training to go, you know what, running tonight's not a great idea. I can move my run to Thursday night and I'm going to do my swim tonight. So adjust your training around and have a level of flexibility that suits how you're actually responding to your training as well. And sometimes that's just tiredness. Sometimes you just go, I'm tired. I don't think I can do that session properly. Let's say you're trying to do a hard training session and you go either mentally or physically, I'm not ready to do that. Move your training around so that you can do it accordingly. The next one is having equipment that suits you. Okay, so, I bring up running shoes, number one. I can tell you lots of stories, but, something like the carbon bladed running shoes are really common now, okay? But they're not for long, easy runs, all right? You want to make sure they're appropriate for what you're doing. So making sure that you have equipment that suits you, especially if you're racking up the Ks. So if you're used to, jogging 5Ks once or twice a week and your shoes are fine, but maybe they're not the most appropriate shoes if you're going to start running 30 Ks a week. Maybe you need something that's a bit more stable. Bike fit is a big one, making sure that your bike is set up. So if you're used to riding 90 minutes once a week with your friends, and now all of a sudden you're riding 7 hours a week, little differences in your setup are cumulative. So you're going to find that that's when the knee niggles, the back niggles, the neck niggles, all those things sort of appear as well. Swimming aids. All right. So depending on your stroke, you may or may not be able to use things like swimming aids, right? So if you're new to swimming, I definitely wouldn't suggest that you pop big, massive size, large paddles on your arm to strengthen up your arms, okay? But, if you're from a swim background and you're used to using that stuff, perfectly fine. So just making sure you pick stuff that's appropriate for you in terms of what you're doing. Doing little things right. So just before this session, I did our group foam rolling class. So once a week, taking the guys through structured foam rolling training. But making sure that you're keeping the body back into sort of a neutral position. When you train, your body goes backwards. You do damage, your body repairs the damage, and then what happens is it improves, okay? But you need to make sure you're doing the little things to make sure that it has the time to recover and to be able to train again. So top-level athletes are not just top because they've got, big engines. They're usually able to train more, all right? So if you're able to train 2-3 times a day because your body recovers really quickly, you're going to improve better than someone that can train every second day because they're sore and tired from what they're doing. That's just how it works. So little things are foam rolling, getting a massage once every couple of weeks, stretching for some people, Sleep is a massively underrated one. All right, so sleep is a huge one. So if you go to the AIS, they're told to go have afternoon naps in terms of what they're doing, because it releases human growth hormone, and that will improve you. Okay, I know for most of you, you have jobs, and that makes it a little bit hard. But just going, hey, I'm going to go to bed at 8:30 instead of staying up till 11 o'clock watching Netflix is definitely helpful as well. The last one is nutrition. And I'm going to keep that as simple as eating healthy, right? So if you're loading up with cans of Coke and sports drink and sports bars and everything else, there's a huge amount of sugar in that stuff, and it tends to have an inflammatory effect on the body in terms of what it's doing. And the last one I will write, and I wrote this and someone laughed at it when they saw my presentation, but I said, the biggest cause of injuries that I see most of the time is ego, all right? And what I mean by that is people either running too far, training too hard, trying to do things that they're not ready to do because they're trying to either say, hey, I need to hit this time, therefore running at this pace needs to become easy, so I'm going to do that every week. Okay, or I'm going to run with this guy because he's fast, and therefore if I run with him, I'm going to become fast. The thing is, if your body's not ready for it, it's not ready for it. Okay, if you follow the process, you'll improve. Don't chase your own ego, okay, in order to do it, or don't look at someone else that trains, that runs 6 days a week, and think, oh, if I want to be fast, I also need to do that. You need to do what your training plan says, not what someone else copes with in terms of what they're doing. All right, next one, nutrition and hydration. All right, so if you want to back up from training, you need to make sure that you eat properly and you hydrate properly. All right, so one of the biggest things that you need to do is to make sure you don't stay dehydrated and that you replenish electrolyte in your body. So every time you train, you sweat, okay, you have salt come out, you need to refill that. All right, muscle contraction requires the appropriate balance of sodium, magnesium, potassium to do its job. All right, but if that is not in the right balance, you can't do it, and you will get stiff and sore in terms of what you're doing. So a couple of guides that I sort of give to people is to make sure they use electrolyte. All right, and that doesn't mean having Gatorade, which does have electrolytes in it. I'm not a big fan of people having hugely sugary drinks with electrolyte, but there's plenty of electrolyte drinks that you can get, Hydrolyte, no shortage of drinks you can get, which are just salt, flavored salt, effectively in terms of what you're doing. But having that after your training, it will also help you absorb the water from the training as well. So if you've sweated out 2 liters of fluids during a training session, you are going to need 3 to 4 liters of fluids to replenish that 2 liters, because some of it will pass straight through you. But if you have salt intake or electrolyte intake, it's easier to do that in terms of what you're doing. Try to eat within 30 minutes of a training session. This will just help refuel carbohydrate that you've got in you, and it will help stimulate the repair response that your body has. So that might be as simple as taking a up and go shake with you, or having a protein shake, or having a sandwich, whatever it is, but try to eat within 30 minutes of what you're doing. The next one that I'll point out is, I spoke earlier about energy systems, right? So, and trying to get your body used to training bodily fat, all right? In order to do that, you need a low heart rate, all right? But the other thing you don't want to do is just be drinking sugar constantly. If you have a constant supply of sugar, your body has no reason to burn through the bodily fat, all right? If you're out there running for an hour or swimming for an hour, you don't need a Gatorade every single time you train, okay? You can just go take water with you. You'll be fine in terms of what you're doing. If you have a huge amount of sugar intake as well, it will have an inflammatory response with you as well. So I would encourage you that if you're doing longer sessions, definitely use some level of carbohydrate to fuel. But if you're going out there for, a 1 hour swim set, you don't need a Gatorade every single time that you do it. The next thing I'll say might sound a bit odd, but if you are going out for your long rides and you're planning for your 3-4 hour bike ride and things like that, is making sure that you take nutrition products that complement your diet. All right. So in triathlon world, you can have anything from, hardcore vegans and paleo and, people that, feast on Maccas and cans of Coke. But what I would say is, if your diet is a high fiber diet and you eat really healthy food, and you eat lots of fruit, lots of veggies, then going out there and sucking on 8 gels over a 4-hour ride usually leads to stomach upset in terms of what you're doing. So if you're used to having, a high amount of fiber, then maybe things like bananas are a better option for you. If your diet's a really processed diet, things like gels might be absolutely fine. But I do see some people that are super careful with their diet, and then when they go out training, they do the complete opposite. right? And it upsets their stomach. So the same as if you sat in the office, you probably wouldn't do well if you just drank, just sort of had gels and sports drink all day. You probably feel pretty average by the end of the day. It's no different when you're out training as well. And the last one is make sure that you're actually testing the stuff in training, which I mentioned earlier as well. So there's nothing worse than someone working out 2 weeks before a race that their nutrition plan's not working, and then you've just got to take a bit of hope and a bit of guessing on race day. I'm not going to touch too much on race day nutrition. I will do that when I do a presentation a few weeks out. But I will talk about a couple of guidelines that people can start thinking about for their own training. So in general, you can absorb about 250 to 400 calories per hour. All right. You will burn somewhere between 600 and 800 calories an hour. So you can see that you are falling into a deficit every single hour of what you're doing. What I would say is start looking, when you're doing your long rides particularly, start working out and looking at the labels and saying, oh, how much is 250 to 400 calories? Okay, and start trying to ingest that during your long bike rides to just get used to it and seeing what that feels like in terms of what you're doing. All right, when you're drinking, for most people, you will burn or you will need somewhere between half a litre and 750 mils of water per hour in terms of what you're doing. If you're 6'4", you probably need, and it's a hot day, you're probably on this end of the scale. If you're 5'2" and it's a cold day, you might be down the lower end of the scale. But have this as a general guideline for what you're doing. So for most of you, that means that if you took 2 full 750 ml bottles for the bike leg, the most of you, it's probably about enough water for what you need. Some of you might need to pick up a third one on the course, depending on how long you're going to be out there for. The other one on race day is the glycemic index. So I would encourage you to use lower GI products, so things that are less sugary to start out with, and to start reaching for the higher sugary products towards the end of the race. All right. So what that looks like is I would happily encourage people to, on the run, I find the simplest thing to give people is to say, don't bother with gels or sports drink. Just grab a cup of Coke, which they'll give you on race day, and a cup of water. So you basically just get caffeine and sugar, and you run to the next aid station, and then you go again. But on the bike, I wouldn't encourage that. I would encourage you to try to eat actual foods. So whether that's a Cliff Sports bar, whether it's bananas, whether it's homemade date loaf that you made yourself is fine, but I would encourage you to eat actual foods earlier for a slower release of food. And then towards the end of the race, you should be taking whatever you can just to get as much sugar in to get to the next aid station and go again. All right. Again, I'm not going to give a huge amount of tips for the race day. I will save that. But I will go through a couple of simple tips in the lead up because these are questions I get asked. Number one, a wetsuit is always faster, all right, for 99.9% of you. So if you have a wetsuit, you should use it. If you're thinking about getting a wetsuit, you should get one. I am 99% sure you will get one on race day when you go through. Goggles, make sure that you've got relatively new goggles for race day, okay? You don't want goggles that fog up, okay? And on that note too, remember it is a race in the morning, so it's usually a good idea to have tinted goggles to some extent. Don't have those ones that are tinted blue. That will make everything look ridiculously bright on race morning. Bike. For that course, a time trial bike is always going to be faster. It's relatively flat in terms of what it is. So if you have a time trial bike, it will be quicker. If you don't have a time trial bike, that's absolutely fine. You can do the event on a mountain bike if you want, but a time trial bike will be the fastest one that you've got. When you're getting closer to race day, make sure you do little things like schedule your bike in to get serviced. All right. So if you have a local shop that you like dealing with, call them in advance and schedule your bike in. Don't contact them 2 weeks out and expect them to be able to do it just because they've probably got 100 other people asking them to do the same thing as well. Do little things that you can control as well. So plan to have things like new tires put on to minimize the chance of getting it flat. All right. Running. One, make sure that you use the shoes that you're going to race in at some point in that sort of last 4 to 6 weeks in terms of what you're doing. And for most people, I would encourage you to have relatively new shoes. So if it was a big event for me, I would have my shoes that I train in, and then maybe 6 to 8 weeks out, I would go buy a brand new fresh set of those so that they all feel a little bit nicer and I haven't worn through them. And then I would use those once a week and wear them in a little bit, and then I would use them on race day for making sure that I'm used to what we're doing. All right, and the other one is, and I'll say this again later, is make sure you wear socks because you don't want blisters on race day. All right, so if you want to win the event, don't wear socks. But for most of you that just want to get through the event and do all right, do the little things that make you comfortable on race day as well. All right, transition. The things that I'll say, don't be in a rush, right? So if you're going out there for the first time, the way that's going to be fastest from the start to the finish is usually taking your time and not rushing anything. So always plan at transition, just go through it all well in your head beforehand, but take your time. Use equipment that makes you comfortable. So, you know, if you normally go out there and you put on cycling gloves for your ride and you put on socks, do that on race day. Don't suddenly do things that, you know, might be uncomfortable or not as, you know, not as confident on race day. Socks on the bike and the run, definitely. And the other one is I don't encourage people to use elastic laces for long distances, because as your foot swells on race day from running and the heat, you'll generally find that starts getting really quite tight around your foot. So I would encourage you to get used to just running with normal laces for what you're doing. All right. In the lead up for swimming, it's an open water swim. So you guys will go into the water 4 people at a time. So outside of the fact of obviously building your swimming fitness up and getting faster in the water and improving your swim technique, there are definitely some things you can prepare to do for race day. One is doing some open water swimming. So if you're in Sydney, you can go out to Balmoral and you can swim with groups. Okay, if you can go out somewhere to practice open water swimming in your sighting, it will make a big difference. Learn how to draft. Drafting will make you a lot faster. All right, so if you can learn to sit on someone's hip and let them do all the work, you can get dragged to a much quicker time. All right, it's about efficiency in terms of what you're doing. Learning to sight. All right, that course is not particularly difficult to sight, but you know, you do need to learn how to be able to swim straight in the open water. So again, going out and practicing open water swimming and learning how to sight for a buoy makes an incredible difference. When you're in your swim sets, you know, there's not a huge amount to keep you entertained when you're doing laps up and down the pool. So focus on your technique when you're swimming. So every single lap, you should be thinking about your head position or your catch position or your hip rotation or your kick. Focus on your technique constantly, because that's where your speed gains are going to come from. When you're out there on race day, you have to pace yourself, right? So just remember, even for the winner, he's out there for 4 hours, all right? So if you're going to be out there for 7 hours, at no point are you going hard, all right? And that includes the swim. So definitely don't go off the line hard or anything like that. You want to take your time and pace yourself in the swim like someone who is going to be prepared to be out there for 5, 6, 7 hours. The other thing I will say is sometime in the lead up to the event, I don't know whether you guys have to do it yet, but they will ask you your approximate swim time. I would encourage you all to lie and to say that you are faster than you actually are. The reason I would say that is because everyone does it. But also, if you want to draft in that format where you jump in the water with 4 people and you all get going, you want to get in the water with people that are a little bit faster than you. Okay, so if you want to draft off them, you don't want to draft off people that are your speed. You want to draft off people that are a little bit faster. So if you think that it will take you 40 minutes to do the swim, you write down 35. If you think it's going to take you 35 minutes, you say 30. Okay, you will get a different cap color depending on which group you say. So I can't remember off the top of my head. There are designated swim times, right? So if you're meant to be in group 3, nominate yourself for a time that will get you in the group above, and then just put yourself at the very back of that group. All right. And so that way you can start with the faster people of the wave behind or the slower people of the wave in front. And either way, it's going to be a benefit for you when you do it. So when you have, I think they ask you that question sometime in the lead up to the race or when you register, I'm not sure. But definitely try to pick a faster group when you do it. All right. Biking. So on race day, all right, I will talk about power stuff a little bit so people can start getting their head around how to do this. So the couple of references I've got here in terms of power targets are really talking about that sort of last 4 to 6 weeks where you're starting to do specific sort of race prep. But on race day, number one is the bike is the place where you eat and drink and treat it as a buffet. All right, so you get out of the swim, you get on the bike. As soon as you get into, 5 minutes in and you're comfortable and you've sort of gotten over the water bit, you want to start eating and drinking. So you want to use the bike to get as much fuel in as you can comfortably tolerate. So you want to get that bathtub as full as possible by turning the tap on as hard as you can so that when you get off the bike, You've got fuel for your body to burn through when you start the half marathon. All right. The next one is pacing yourself. So hopefully a lot of people here have probably got Zwift or Wahoo Kickers and have an idea of power. But pacing yourself on the bike is incredibly important because you need to make sure that you bike at a pace that allows you to run well as well. So there's no point having amazing bike split if you have a 4-hour split for the marathon. You need to make sure that you balance those two out when you're going through. So I have put some approximate targets here for people. The pace that you can go on the bike depends on how long the bike is going to take you. All right. So if you're, super strong on a bike and your threshold power is 400 watts, you are going to be off the bike in 2 and a bit hours. So you can go harder. All right. If you have a threshold power of 120 because you're a small female, then what you're going to find is that you can't push 120. 120 watts doesn't go very far. And the bike leg's always going to take you 3.5, 4 hours to do. And you have to go at a lower pace. Okay. That is how this works. So if you know approximately how long the bike leg is going to take you, and there's plenty of ways that can be sort of worked out, but basically if you expect to be out there for more than 3.5 hours, you need to have a lower percentage of your FTP. All right. If you know that you're a bit of a powerhouse on the bike and the bike leg is going to take you 2.5 hours or less, you can start really increasing the amount of percentage of threshold power that you're going on here as well. That's the biggest tip that I can give you. If you actually go to our website, there is a free calculator on there. So you can put in your threshold power, you can put in a bunch of metrics, and it will tell you your approximate FTP that you should be holding. And if everyone wants, I'll send a link to that specific page so it's easy to find as well. The other thing in the lead up for biking is learn to be a good bike rider. So learn to change your gears, learn to corner, but particularly for time trialing, you want to be really, really smooth. So if you were to change your gears really regularly on the bike and you're really smooth with your power output, I'd liken it to if you go for a run and you constantly change the speed on the treadmill and increase it, then decrease it, then, change the speed up, it's really taxing on your legs. If you keep it at one pace, it's a lot easier to maintain. And biking is exactly the same. If you're good at gear changes, you are the one that regulates how smooth the power can be. And the Regatta Centre, or Penrith in general, is the sort of course where you can be quite smooth if you want to be. All right, run tips. Number one is always pace yourself. So if in training, all your runs were at 6-minute K pace, don't suddenly think you can hold 4-minute 30K pace on race day. All right. And the amount of times I've seen that because they felt good. The reason you felt good is because you're excited. You got off the bike and it's this big event. You can't out-tough physiology. Your physiology didn't magically change. You need to be able to control yourself on race day. So I think as long as you're within realms of what you're doing, but don't set a 5K PB in the first 5K and then just slowly descend into walking. All right. Really control yourself from the get-go. Number two is your heart rate. All right. So heart rate determines which energy system you're doing. You're now at the point of the race where the bathtub is getting more and more empty in terms of what you're doing. So you need to make an effort to keep your heart rate down. So the things that I would encourage people to do on race day is things like walking through the aid stations. One, because it gives you time to actually get liquids and nutrition in and get it down, because it's really hard to swallow liquids when you're running hard. But it also gives you a chance for your heart rate to come down and give it a little bit of a break and dip the energy system a little bit lower before you start running again. It also makes the run a lot easier. Rather than being a 21.1K run, it's a lot easier mentally if you just realize it's 10 aid stations. You run to one aid station, you drink, okay, 1 of 10 done, you run to the next one, okay? It breaks it down for you. With your heart rate on the run, same as on the bike, the faster you are, the harder you can go, all right? So if you're one of those guys that goes, look, I can run a 90-minute or under half marathon, realistically, you can probably run with a heart rate that's nearing towards your lactate threshold. All right. If you know this run leg is going to take me 2 hours 50 on a good day, you really need to do your best to keep this down so that you don't run out of energy in terms of what you're doing. So the pace that you can run is usually, again, set by how quick you're going to be on race day when you go through. I will go through pacing and stuff more when we do the session a couple of weeks out as well. So I'll just give generalizations for today in terms of what you're doing. One of the last ones that I always touch on is the mental side. So everyone focuses on the physical training and all that stuff. And that's all obviously very incredibly important, but you need to be mentally prepared for some of these things. So the biggest tip I tell people is don't get focused ever on the outcome, only ever focus on the process of what they need to do. So if you want the fastest time possible, you need to implement the best process that you can on the race day. So when you're out there, you don't ever think, oh, I need to hit 5 hours or I need to run this pace. The answer is that you need to do exactly what you need to do at that moment to give you the best process, and that will give you the best time that you're going to get on race day. The next one is only to concentrate on what you're doing, right? So if you're in a training club or you've got a group of friends, it's natural for everyone to offload their insecurities and to tell you all the training that they're doing. So, you get people that say, oh, I'm swimming, this many times a week and I'm running, 70 Ks a week. And you have to have the confidence to know that's okay. They do what they do and I'm going to do what I'm doing in terms of what they're doing. So it's not about who can do the most training in the lead up. It's about you doing the best training for you for this round and cycle of your training in terms of what you're doing. The next thing is the events aren't easy, all right? So at no point in your training will you get through a week and then just go, I think this event's going to be easy, all right? You've got to get the realization that there will be days that are hard with your training, and it might be hard because you're tired. It might be hard because you don't feel like it that day. It might be hard because it's hot, all right? But it's not going to be easy in terms of what you're doing. But the event is meant to be a challenge, and you have to embrace that in terms of what it is. So I think for me, when you're doing those tough events and you have those really hard days, you got to smile and you got to enjoy those, because that's the whole reason that you're out there doing these. The next one is, if it's your first time, you'll always have moments which is like, I don't think I can do this. It's too hard, all right? But you got to realize that to eat an elephant, you do it slowly, right? So you'll all have this moment where you realize, I don't think I can do this, all right? But you can, you will. And there's plenty of people that will say, oh, I've only got up to 12 Ks of training, 12 Ks of running in training. But how am I going to finish race day? And the reality is you'll just keep going, right? You won't lack for motivation when you've got 8 Ks to go, right? You will just keep going. You will jog for a bit. You will walk for a bit. You will start jogging for a bit. Or maybe you just walk 8 Ks, but you will get through. You'll be all right. All right. And the next one is being positive. So this goes for race day as well as training, but you are your biggest supporter, all right? You'll have days when you don't want to do stuff. On race day, I guarantee you will all have a moment where you go, why am I doing this? Because this is hard, all right? And those are the times where you got to encourage yourself positively. So when you run past family and friends, everyone claps for you and cheers, and you stand a bit more upright when you go through, because you've got that external feedback. You got to be your own feedback person, all right? If you tell yourself you're tired, you are tired, all right? If you tell yourself, you're not running well, you won't run well. The amount of people I've seen have a bad day because, they've gotten to swim and they've decided I'm not swimming well, all right? And that whole day unfolds because of that thought. You've got to tell yourself, I'm doing well from start to finish. And if you are doing well, doesn't mean you're fast. Doing well means I'm doing the best process I can today, and that's going to give me the best time. And once you accept that, you'll always do well in terms of what you're doing. All right. General tips. All right. So there is no one session, no 1 week, no 1 month that is that important, right? You will have disruptions in your training, right? So you'll have weeks where work gets in the way, family gets in the way. It's a 16-week block of training. All of you are probably going to get a cold at some point during that block. That's all completely normal. Don't worry about any of those things. If you're always missing your long bike ride, that's a problem. But if 1 week you miss your bike ride and you did the other 15, you did 90-something% of them. All right, so it's fine. And the same goes for a swim set. There's no one magical swim set. If you're saying, hey, I got in the water twice a week on average most weeks, again, 90-odd% of sessions completed is pretty good. So don't worry if you don't have it perfect, because it's not going to be. Race day won't go perfectly. It never does. There's always some sort of hiccup. The main thing is that you get your head around what can go wrong and you make plans for that. Anything from flat tire to, I got blisters to, my stomach was a bit upset. If you're kind of well planned out, you've already decided what you're going to do, and you can make plans for that as you go through. Focus on the training. I've already said that, but you want to always make sure that it's always about you, all right? So you're not trying to run other people's paces. You're not trying to bike, to the power of other people. You need to focus on you and what you need to do for a little patch. For some of you who've got kids and families and stuff, it might mean that, having a 6-week patch where you kind of have an agreement that you don't have to mow the lawn or something, and you get to be selfish for that little bit through there. And the last one is concentrating on your training, right? So don't focus on what other people are doing. Always just focus on what you're doing. If they can do 3 times the training volume as you, that's absolutely fine. You just need to do the training volume and the training sessions that are suitable for you, not for them when they go through. So I think that's my last slide. It is. All right. So I've imparted a lot of information, and I'd love to have some questions from people if they've got some. So has anyone out there got some questions about anything that I've gone through or covered, or importantly not covered?
I wanted to check, were we ever going to do like a group open water swim?
Yes, we are actually organising some at the moment. So Coach Nick is going to do them. I know Nadine's got some dates penciled in. I think they're trying to work out the venue. So we're trying to actually see whether we can get access to the regatta centre, because one, that's where you guys are going to swim, but also it's just a nice, safe venue, and it's certainly easier for a lot of people to get to as well. But the plan is that there will be 2 open water swim sessions, hopefully before race day.
Okay, sweet. Thanks.
All right. Are there any other questions from the group at all?
Yeah, Dan.
Yep.
Strength training.
Yep.
Would you do low reps or high reps?
Depending on the phase. So I'm never a fan of low reps and high weights in general for athletes. I think, if you're going through a maintenance level of stuff, I'd be saying something that you can do 12 to 15 of would be good, and not going to failure. So if you're a gym junkie and you're trying to get bigger, going to the point where you can't physically push them out is what they do to get bigger. But for you guys, it's all about stability. So if you're finding, you get to 12 and those last couple are, 8 to 9 out of 10 for effort to get through, then for me, that's about the right level for what you're trying to do. But what you're doing in off season versus, if you said, hey, look, if you're doing Western Sydney, which is now sort of 15 weeks out, ideal world would have been to do the heavier weight period, probably over the preceding 8 weeks. And then now we're at a point where we go, look, Matt's got to this sort of strength level. And so now our job is just to kind of keep him there and not to progress, but just not to go backwards, but potentially doing less sessions, but just trying to keep the similar sort of weights with a smaller number of, repetitions with what we're doing.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
All right.
Sorry, Sue here from Port Macquarie. The zones, are they different based on your age group or something like that, the zone levels, or not? It's just... Yeah, so zones are, if you go to the web, you'll see 220 minus your age, which is garbage. Don't ever use that. Yep, so it doesn't work. So you really need to set those up individually. So there's a couple of different methods out there to do it. The way I like to do it is to base your zones off what's called your lactate threshold. So if you go out for, say, a hard, park run and you try to do a PB, right, you'll find that your heart rate probably, after you get going, you might see your heart hover around, 168 beats or something. All right, on a practical basis, what that means is it's that your body hits about 168 beats, and the rate at which it's producing lactic acid is the rate at which you're able to clear it out. So if you go any harder, you can't sustain that effort because your body's filling with lactic acid. Okay, that's the best way to do it. So your lactate threshold is generally around about 87% of your maximum heart rate. And then you can work backwards and kind of work out what those training zones are. There's a couple of different methods that exist out there. There's ones that I prefer because I think they're just more accurate. But definitely using your lactate threshold, which you can find on a practical basis. If you've got a bit of training history, and normally if it's an athlete that I coach and I'm taking on, I sort of say, hey, can you pick some dates in your history where you've just run 5K hard, or you did a sprint race, or you did something that was sort of an hour long or under that you went really hard at, and there's enough information in there to try to work that stuff out. Thank you.
But definitely don't use 220 minus your age. That's not accurate. So in my experience, like I've had anything from athletes that can hit 220 beats per minute with heart rate. And then I've had other athletes that if their heart rate hit 140, they were close to vomiting because their zones are just, you get, guys that their heart rates are really elevated, and you get other guys that are down here. Most people are somewhere in the middle. But age definitely the factor. So younger athletes can generally have higher heart rates. Older athletes will generally have lower heart rates. But your training history is really relevant as well. So as you train, if you're a well-trained athlete, your heart is a muscle and it will enlarge. All right. So same as your bicep will grow if you do bicep curls. But as your heart muscle or your heart enlarges, it does not need to beat as fast to pump the same amount of blood around the body. All right. So what becomes relevant is what's called stroke volume, which is the amount of volume of blood that is pushed around the body per beat. All right. So if you have an elite Tour de France cyclist, it would not be uncommon for them to have resting heart rates of like 30. All right. Because 30 beats for them is enough for them to pump the blood around the body. But if you have an untrained 13-year-old that loves playing PlayStation, wouldn't surprise me if they have a resting heart rate of 80 because they have no reason to have a large heart if they don't train. Yeah. Any other questions? No lurkers with any more questions?
Just from like a cost perspective, if we definitely need a wetsuit, do you have any like recommendations?
Yeah, there's one, ask to borrow one. So for you, I would actually just post up on Facebook or ask around and someone will lend you one. That is the easiest way to kind of go. Generally with wetsuits, you kind of get what you pay for to some extent. So you can definitely get wetsuits that are maybe $200. The differences between the cheap wetsuits and the expensive wetsuit is generally the paneling around the shoulders. So the cheaper ones have less panels, and so you don't have the easy movement around the shoulder, whereas the more expensive ones will have lots of different panels in there, and they'll be quite thin around the shoulder, but maybe they're thick again around the forearm, and they're thick around here. And so they're designed a little bit better for movement. So they're just easier to move in. So one thing with a lower quality wetsuit, they can be quite restrictive, but with a higher quality wetsuit, you've just got an awesome full body floaty on. But for you, I would actually just say ask around and someone will lend you a wetsuit because your height, build, everything else is nice and simple to work with. If you're 6'4", it's a problem, but for you, it's not going to be a problem.
All right, cool. Thank you.
That's all right. But I would recommend a wetsuit if you can get one, even on the basis that the water's probably going to be cold. All right. Any other questions? Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do, I've got everyone's email addresses. So I'm going to send everyone a bit of a summary of stuff in the next day or two. I'll send some links to a few bits and pieces to help people if they want to work out their training zones and bits and pieces. We've obviously got some training plans and stuff for Western Sydney as well as 70.3 and other events. So I'll send some people some details on that as well. But if anyone has any questions at all in the next week or couple of months, by all means, feel free to contact me and I'll help you out if I can. I will do another presentation in about 2-3 weeks out. It'll be all just about Western Sydney. So there's the assumption that all your training is going well. And I'm just going to talk about what happens on race day, how to pace yourself on race day, as well as, just the logistics of how the whole thing's going to run. So it'd be great if I could see everyone again in that time period. But if anyone's got any questions at all, by all means, shoot me an email in the next couple of days as well.
Thank you.
No worries, guys. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being part of it.
Great, thank you, Dan.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Daniel.
much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks,
Huh.
Dan.
Thanks.
That went well. That went well.